Hi, and welcome to another Complete 3D Concepts tutorial. My name is Josh, and in this 4-part tutorial series we'll be taking an in-depth look at working with point clouds in the free version of Autodesk Recap. We'll be covering all stages of the process, from the user interface to the importing of scan data and then working with the scan data once you have it set up. During this series I will be talking about all the tips, tricks and traps we have found in our time working with point clouds in Recap. In the last part of this series, we will be looking to set up the point cloud with the view to taking it either into Inventor or AutoCAD to work with. Due to the amount of information that we will need to cover on this topic, I will be breaking this tutorial up into 4 episodes. You can subscribe to our channel to get notifications when we upload them, find them in our channel, or we will add links to the description below as they get posted. As this is part 3 in the series, you can click on the links on screen now, or the links in the description below to view parts 1 and 2. In part 1, we covered the importance of keeping Recap up to date, the current process of downloading and installing the latest version, the way the professional and free versions work after being installed, the user interface on the home screen of Recap, the settings dialog box, and the process of setting up and opening both RCP and RCS files, as well as the dangers of using Save As. In part 2, we covered the process of importing non-native file formats into Recap, some of the differences in the file formats, and some things to be aware of when importing files. In this tutorial, we will look at navigation of the point cloud and the user interface when working with point clouds. I know that doesn't sound like much, but there's a lot more to Recap than meets the eye at first. If you are revisiting this series to refresh your memory on something, each of the videos have some timestamps in the description below to allow you to jump to the topic changes if you need to. With that out of the way, less talking, more CADing. If you have been following the other tutorials, you should now have a working RCP file open. If you are having problems opening an RCP file, you can go back to the first tutorial and see if there is a fix or an answer to your problem there. Once you have your RCP file open, the first thing you'll want to know about is navigation. If you click and hold the right mouse button, it will allow you to rotate around the point underneath where the mouse pointer is when you click it. This means if you are over the scan, it will rotate the point below the mouse pointer. If you're in clear space, it will rotate in a random place in space. Middle click is pan and mouse wheel is to zoom in and out. If you forget any of these or would like to use some more advanced navigation tools like walk and fly through, you can see the reminders here under the compass menu fly out thingy, but these basic ones get me by 99.99% of the time. Left click is for selection, and you will notice here that when you select something in Recap that the menu down the bottom changes. This is because Recap has what Autodesk refers to as a contextual user interface. This is just a fancy way of saying that some of the buttons and menus will change depending on what you have selected and where your mouse is hovering. This seems a little odd at first, but it's surprising how fast and easy it is to get used to, so persevere with it because you will start wishing that some of your other programs worked like this when you get really used to it. So let's have a look at the functions we have available to us. Under the Home button, you have the usual suspects of Save and Save As discussed in part 1 of the series. You have Open with the last few projects that you've worked on, and this one is Recover Deleted Points, which does exactly as it says. This is an interesting, handy and annoying function of Recap in that you can recover points that have been deleted from any stage in your project's history, meaning that if you import a point cloud that is a lot larger than you need it to be, you can delete all of the points you don't want to see, but if you decide later that you want them back for some reason, with the click of a button you will get them all back. This is not a thing that I do or use, so use it cautiously. I would hate for someone to make a liar out of me and lose a heap of data, but it worked for me like this with a few open and close cycles when testing for this tutorial. While I know this probably sounds brilliant to those people who accidentally delete stuff they shouldn't on a regular basis, if you're trying to delete the points to improve performance and reduce file size, just deleting them won't do that for you. To achieve that, you have to export your cleaned up scan and re-import it into Recap. The other annoying thing to take note of is that not all other programs that work with Recap files will recognize that you have deleted the points and can display the deleted points even though in theory it shouldn't be, so you've been warned about that little trap. The next 2 functions are the import-export functions, and they do exactly as you would expect. You can import more scans into the project you're working on, or you can export your cleaned up point clouds for use in other programs or for re-importing into Recap. If you are going to re-import a file into Recap, I would highly recommend exporting the native Recap format of RCS for two reasons. One, they seem to be one of the most compressed point cloud formats to work with, saving you hard drive space and working better with other programs. And two, they are the easiest and fastest format to get into Recap again. I will cover a little more on this in the final part of the series, as we will be using this workflow to get our point cloud ready for use in Inventor. The cog is for the project settings. I've covered what these settings all do in part 1, so you can check that out here if you're interested or need a refresher. The question mark will take you to the online help, and the information button will show you the product version and license agreement. Lastly, the door is to exit the program, so don't click on that. While you won't use a lot of those functions very regularly once you have your project up and running, the next menu is a little different. In here we have display controls, and depending on your scan you can spend a bit of time messing with these settings. As you can see here, the color wheel changes the color the point cloud is displayed in. If you are working with a scan that hasn't had color data applied to it, RGB will display this horrible black and white gradient over the scan from black at the bottom or lowest points of the scan to white at the top of the scan. As you can see, it's very difficult to see anything in this mode. If you have color information, it can be quite a different story though, as you can see with this scan. Elevation is often the best setting to use to be able to see your point cloud clearly when there is no color or intensity information in your scan data. The color gradient scale here displays the current gradient being used to display your point cloud. If you look very closely in the top left corner here, there is a settings cog where you can create your own or change the color gradient to a custom one if you are finding it very difficult to get a decent display with the standard settings. Like color, intensity, normal and scan locations can only be displayed if that information was in the file when it was imported. The intensity of the light returned to the scanner's sensor is recorded when doing the scans on some scanners and is displayed as a color gradient when the information is available like this. Normals are usually calculated by software and are basically little lines that come out from a point perpendicular to the surface that the point and surrounding points are on. While that line can theoretically come from either side of the point, the software typically favours the side of the scanner. In the case where the software can't calculate a reasonable surface, it just draws a line towards the scanner. Normals are typically used in surface modelling and not something that you really need to worry about for most jobs with Recap. But just know, if they are available, they can be used to display the point cloud in different colours, and that might help you visualise or break up your point cloud for different applications. Scan locations only come in some file formats. While I haven't experimented personally with all the file formats, I can tell you that they come in PTX files, which leads me to believe that they would also come with other structured data formats such as PTG and some E57 files. The easiest way to think of the light settings is that it changes the way the point cloud is lit and the shadows and reflections that are caused by those settings. This is something that is best left to individual taste and scans, as the effect these settings have can depend on many variables. The next one along is point settings. The point display slider makes the points bigger or smaller. Again, this is dependent on the user and the scans as to the preferred settings. However, the next setting should be used very carefully, and here's why. At first glance, the update origin might seem like the answer to some people's prayers when they are dealing with the scan data that has a seemingly nonsensical origin point. This command will allow you to make any point in your point cloud the origin, and then allow you to align the Z and X axes to any reasonably flat surface of points in the cloud. This is great if you plan on doing all of the modelling of the existing features in the point cloud yourself, but if you change the origin and you are having any modelling of the point cloud done by a third party, they are now working off a different origin, and when they deliver their modelled components, they will not line up with your point cloud without what could be a huge amount of stuffing around. No problem, I hear people saying. We will just return the origin to the standard position with the reset origin button. But not so fast. What happens to all the new stuff that you have already modelled into your job? I would recommend steering well clear of this unless you know there will be no third-party input into your job. If you are going to change the origin point, also make a point of making it the very first thing you do on your job. For the record, most registration software sets the center or nodal point of the scanner at the first scan location of the job as the default origin. If having a specific origin point in your point cloud or having your point cloud tied into a site grid or geo-referenced is critical to your workflow, let your scan service provider know at the start of the job so they can take the necessary steps to make this happen for you while performing the scan job. Now back to recap. The eye allows you to toggle the visibility of some of the functions and displayed items on your user interface. Mirror balls are these little shiny or glowing balls that you can see in your point cloud here. They are representations of the individual scanner locations throughout the scan job. You can click on them and go into a 360-degree panorama-like view or real view of the point cloud from the perspective of the scanner. Autodesk like to call this 2.5D as it is more like a 2D photo than a 3D point cloud from this view, but you can still take measurements from all the points in the point cloud, hence the 0.5D. This can be handy sometimes for viewing really busy environments like processing facilities with lots of pipe work or placing a measurement and then taking a screenshot to send to a client. Just keep in mind the default view of the point cloud while in real view is RGB, and if you don't have RGB values in your point cloud it will be impossible to see anything. Autodesk are working on adding some other options here, but they've never worked for us, so keep updating Recap and hopefully one day it will be fixed. The mirror balls will only show up if you have imported your scan data into Recap from a structured file format like FLS, ZFS, PTX, PTG, and some E57 files. It can be handy to adjust the size of them for ease of selection or to turn them off altogether if you are taking screenshots of the scan to send to someone. Annotations, as you would expect, allows you to toggle the visibility of any measurements or notes you may have placed on the scan. Perspective allows you to switch between perspective and orthographic views, and finally, Tools allows you to switch off some of the commands that you might not be using, like feedback, navigation, and undo buttons, and that bloody annoying grid. Lastly, down the side here we have the magnifying glass to try and bait us into paying for the Pro version of Recap, but for the most part you just don't need it, so don't bother unless you plan on doing scan registration. The cloud services are in beta testing at the moment and sound very promising. I've seen some excellent examples of both cleanup and meshing. If you're interested in using these functions, I would have a really good look at them, but before laying out any money for them, there are some big pros and cons to consider. The biggest of which for me is the upload and download to get your point cloud into the cloud for processing and then back again. And the last button here is the feedback button, which I think is an excellent idea, but please don't use it to abuse Autodesk for something that you're having trouble with. By all means report issues and request features, but please be respectful, otherwise an open conduit to the Autodesk developers will be lost. And now to the important stuff. Down the bottom here you will see the ever-changing menus. These are the contextual menus that change depending on the current command and selections. The big one most people are interested in straight away is the measurements and notes. These functions will allow you to take measurements between any 2 points in the point cloud, which is something that takes a little bit of getting used to get it right, but don't fear because there's always the X, Y and Z values here. It will also allow you to take an angle measurement between any 3 points in the point cloud and add a note to any point anywhere at all in the scan. This is handy if you have multiple people working on a point cloud. If you want to delete an annotation, you can select it and click on the rubbish bin icon, or you can hide it by selecting the eye icon. If you want to turn the annotations back on, you can do that via the Project Navigator under Annotations. While we're in the Project Navigator, I will just quickly show you the fact that you can turn off the individual scans if you have them under scan locations. The first menu in this bar though is the selection tools. You will have a choice of plane select, fenced or window. The plane selection will select the points on a plane within the set distance of a few selected points. If you end up in a situation where not all points get selected on the plane that you were hoping would, hold Shift, select a few more points in that area that was missed and hit Enter again. This should append the missing points to the selection. You need to be careful when using the plane selection tool though, as it looks through the whole point cloud for any points that fit that plane. This means that if you're trying to select points on a plane that runs at a strange angle through the point cloud, you may end up selecting points that you don't want. Likewise, if you're trying to pick the points on a wall in one room and the adjoining room has a wall on the same plane, you will get points in both rooms. So just make sure you check the result before taking the next step with the selected data, like deleting it. The fence selection works as you would expect and selects the points inside the sketched fence. You can do whatever shape fence you want, and at the end, double-click the last point. The window mode is just a simple rectangular shape selection tool. Something to keep in mind when selecting points is that Recap selects points all the way through the displayed point cloud within that fence or window. For this reason, it's often better to work in orthographic mode when doing selections. Just remember that clipping planes that we spoke about in the settings dialog box in part 1 of the series only work in perspective mode. So how do you select things that are inside a building, I hear you ask? Well, that's an excellent question and leads me to the most useful and talked about tool when working with point clouds, the limit box. The limit box is exactly as the name suggests, a box that limits the extent of the displayed points. By dragging the faces of the box, we can change the size of it. By holding Shift, we can select faces on the opposite side of the box to move them without having to rotate the view. Alternately, you can go to Options and select Use Inner Faces. To see where the limit box is cutting through the cloud a little easier, we can turn the highlight edges on and the points that are right on the box face light up red. If we want to rotate the box to better line up with a wall, for example, we can hold Control, select a corner, and you can turn the box as you can see here. You can rapidly resize the limit box by clicking on Pick and then picking a point in the point cloud. This works particularly well for a smaller, more isolated object. We can then move the limit box sides to suit and click Confirm to isolate the points inside the limit box. This allows us to isolate and select bits that we want without selecting things in the background. Most programs that work with point clouds have some form of limit box-esque features, so get used to using them as they are the most handy tool in the arsenal of point cloud manipulation tools. If you have a limit box set up that you would like to easily be able to get back to at any time, you can save it by hovering over or clicking on the project navigator, hovering over the view states line and clicking the plus icon. Give your view state a meaningful name and move on. You can then come back to it at any time with a single click. In some cases, the limit box might be too much messing around or too coarse of a method to select and hide the points that we want. So what do we do there? The obvious answer is to turn the points off you don't want to see. But how do we do this? First, you need to select them. Other than deleting the points, once we have them selected, we can clip inside the selection or outside. When you clip inside, it hides the points that you have selected, allowing us to see inside of the building and select equipment. When we are done, we can unclip to get all our points back. However, this can be a pain if we need to turn the points off again later for some reason. So the best way to get around this is to select points that you want to hide and assign them to a region. For those familiar with the more traditional drafting and modeling packages, it's easier to think of regions as layers. To assign points to a region, we simply select the points that we want to hide, hover over the Regions button, and select the New Region button. Give your region a meaningful name like Walls, then click OK. The points change colour to show that they are part of a new region. Whenever you select the points again, it will also show up as the colour that corresponds to the region that they are on. The regions can now be seen here in the Project Navigator. So if you want to hide the points now, all you have to do is click the eye icon and they're gone. You can now start adding the other walls to the regions by selecting them, hovering over the Regions button again, and selecting the Walls region. The crossed out eye here indicates the region is hidden and your points disappear. Any points not yet assigned to a specific region will remain on the unassigned points region. Add some more regions for the roof sheet. the floor, and you can see here how easy it is to break down a point cloud and how easily it can be viewed and worked with. With view states also taking into account the visibility of regions, it can be amazingly quick to change the display of a point cloud for any visualization purposes. If at any time we make a mistake with selecting our points, we have the option to clear the selection by clicking this button or pressing Escape. That brings us to the end of the third part of this series. Remember, you can find the links to the other parts of this series in the description below. In the next and final part of this series, we will be tying all of this information together and preparing a point cloud for taking into Inventor and AutoCAD to work with. If you like what you have seen here, please don't forget to click the like button below to let me know. Also, don't forget to subscribe to be among the first to get the last part in the series, as well as other tutorial series as we post them. If you have any questions about what you have seen in this video, please feel free to post them in the comments below and we will try and answer them as fast as we can. Thanks for watching and catch you next time.